Archangel Chronicles. Copyright 2021 by Raymond, all rights reserved. Chapter 5. From the Land of the Dead. I was pushed and fell into a deep, dark well of water by some unseen hand. As I fell, I realized that my hands and feet were tied. I could not swim. I could not tread water. Down I sank. I looked up, seeing the round opening of the well in the sky above. It got darker and darker as I sank. I held my breath until it felt my lungs would burst. The circle of light above grew weaker and weaker. I understood I was going to die here. Then I felt the rope bounds around my wrists loosen. With a final effort, I struggled and was able to discard the ropes that bound my hands. I kicked my legs and found that the ropes around my ankles had come free. I swam up toward the circle of light, breaking the surface just in time to exhale like a whale and breathe in the sweet, moist air. I was treading water and looked around. How do I climb out of this well? I looked for a foothold, a stair, a ladder, anything. And then I woke up. I sat bolt upright, drenched in sweat. The morning sun had started its blazing arc across the sky. I held up my hand to shade my face and came to my senses. Here I was, on the deck of the felucca. Abu was close by, stirring and coming slowly out of his sleep. I got up and went into the boat's hold. There lay the bodies of the captain and his mate, neatly arranged on the floor, wrapped in an old sail. I loosened the ropes binding the bodies and exposed them. They were lying face up. Their faces were paper white, their skin stone cold, their eyes still closed as if in sleep. I carefully examined their exposed necks and could see a terrible gash cut by the very sharp blade. They would have died quickly. The loss of blood would have driven them unconscious within moments. The gash to their throats would have prevented any sound, any scream or whimper. Mr. Cat had been an efficient killer. I wrapped the bodies carefully back into their makeshift funeral shrouds and climbed back on deck. Abu was up, and he began to assemble bread and figs for breakfast. I looked up and down the great river. There were no signs of our assailants' corpses. The river had swallowed them up without a trace. "What now, Kyrios?" asked Abu quietly. "Can you handle the steering oar if I work the side oars? We'll find a town and we'll see if we can hire someone to attend to these bodies," I replied. Together, we managed to maneuver the boat back out of the center of the river and into the current. While we progressed again at a stately pace down the river borne by the current, I began to think of how I would explain having two dead boatmen's bodies with their throats cut to anyone in authority that we might meet. I began furiously turning over different stories in my mind and had imaginary discussions with someone like the Tribune. What would I say? Were we waylaid by pirates? If that was the case, why hadn't they taken in my gold? Why would the pirates leave us living? I could not work out a believable story. Should we put weights in the canvas sails wrapping the bodies and slip them overboard? I just could not bring myself to do that. I could not disrespect these worthy, hard-working boatmen. Their families deserved to know what happened. In the end, the best way was to exactly tell the truth. The blood on the deck would corroborate my account, and I determined that, no matter what, it was best to stick to the truth. About midday, the river made a broad turn to the west. As we rounded the bend, on the western shore closest to us, there was a grove of palm trees at the river's edge. A familiar figure in a gray, hooded robe sat on a log with a fire at his feet, preparing a meal. He looked directly at me, and those gray eyes were unmistakable. "Raphael!" I cried. Abu, working the steering oar, looked at me quizzically. Kyrios, he said, who are you talking to? To Raphael, over there, I pointed, in the grove of palm trees. Do you not see him? Quick, steer for that shore, I said as I sprang to the oars and began to furiously work them. The boat glided quietly to the shore, and I jumped off the bow, ran to the top of the bank and stood in front of Raphael. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped up, kneeled before him, and bowed my head. Raphael stood up at once and clasped his hands around my shoulders, and with amazing strength forced me to my feet. He looked deeply into my eyes and bowed his head and said, Adam, you must not kneel before me. I am not your God. I sighed, and tears came quickly. You have done well, my friend, he said softly. Not without great cost, I said, for we have lost 2 boatmen. Their throats were cut like dogs. They that waylaid us did an evil thing. What shall I do, for they lie dead in the hold? On my account. Adam, Raphael said softly to me, the power of the evil one is afoot. It has touched your soul with long wicked fingers and probed. No one can encounter that malevolence and come away unscathed. Where there is great evil, there you will find innocent victims, such as these men. But why did you not come? Why did you not tell me these things, if you could foresee them? I implored. Because that is not the way. It is for you, all of you, to face these truths, and with courage to stand firm. It is not by chance you were brought to this time and place. You have a certain wisdom among humans, and you must use it wisely. I felt the presence of Abu standing behind me. I turned to him. He said with fear in his voice, Kyrios, who are you speaking to? I turned back to Raphael. He looked at me with great tenderness. Adam, he said, it is not yet time for him to know. He cannot see me. Though I do not understand, I accept this, I said. Raphael of the gray eyes looked at Abu. You have done well to save this boy. I tell you, he is beloved of Elohim. You saved him from a life of suffering and degradation. Your actions do you credit. He shall become one of the elect. I tell you that much will be expected of him, and he will suffer much. But he will be a worthy servant of Elohim, although he does not yet know. Raphael looked toward the boat. Bring the bodies out of the boat, and lay them here before me. I will see what can be done. I turned back to Abu, tears flowing down my cheeks. Kyrios, Abu said, falling at my feet, hugging my ankles. He began to sob. I do not understand. What has happened to you? Are you mad? Are you seeing visions? Have you been possessed? My dear son, I said, for you are as a son to me, the son I never had. In time you will understand. Here stands a messenger of God, the healer, the angel Raphael. It is not yet given for you to see him. In time that may change. Do not be afraid. I ask you to trust me. Help me bring these boatmen out here, for Raphael wishes to see them. I am afraid, Abu said urgently through his tears. We must return these men to their families so that they can be prepared for burial and placed in a sarcophagus, for they must make their journey to the land of the dead. It is our sacred duty. We cannot leave them here alone. They will wander the earth forever lost if we do. I put my hands on each side of Abu's face and lifted it so that I could look deep into his eyes. Abu, you must trust me. We must do this. All will be well. Without another word, Abu and I went into the boat, and I struggled to bring the lifeless bodies out. We laid them on the riverbank. I stood back, and Raphael came forward. Open the shrouds, and let me see their faces," he commanded. I did so. Abu stood behind me, whimpering and shaking in fear. He could not see Raphael and thought I was talking to the thin air. Raphael knelt at the head of the corpses. He placed his hands on their heads, first on one, then the other. He bowed his head. Still kneeling, he raised his face to the skies and began a chant in a language I could not understand, first in a low, plaintive cry, then in rising tones. His face became luminous. The Chi-Rho metal on my chest began to vibrate and then glow. Daylight seemed to fall away. All light faded and vanished, except for Raphael, who was shining like a torch in the darkness. I looked at him, who was still kneeling, singing his enchanting song, and I saw that he was not alone. There were two pillars of light, first behind him, approaching swiftly from a distance, and then they were at his side. I recognized the first one. It was Gabriel. Just as the first time I had seen him, in the despair of my own confinement, I now again witnessed the great pillar of light coalesce into a head and then a body, transparent, clothed in shimmering, dazzling white robes. Those dazzling white robes, girded at the waist by a belt of shimmering gold, streamed out behind him, giving the impression he was traveling towards us at great speed. His face was like lightning, flashing blue and white and hot. He had that same impassive expression, his eyes hawk-like, his platinum hair long and streaming as if wind-blown, his beauty so intense, so bright, so full of potential, it filled me with a deep rapture. Flanking Raphael was another pillar of luminous light, which coalesced into a bright and then blinding white-hot fire. This light was like water, quicksilvered and pulsating. There was movement within it, swirling, a rush of flame, like I had first seen Gabriel, but more powerful and more awe-inspiring. I heard a crackling noise like static electricity, and then within the pulsating pillar of light the image of many, many eyes. Then out of the pillar stepped a being with shimmering silver skin, clad in glowing armor, with long golden hair crowned with a gold diadem. In his hands he held a flaming sword which pulsated and crackled as he stepped forward. Somehow I knew that this was Michael. I would have been utterly terrified had I not seen the apparition of Gabriel in my cell. As it was, I was struck dumb with the beauty and strangeness of it all. I fell to my knees and bowed down. My mind was filled with a vision of countless points of light that moved and began to coalesce into twinkling ribbons, along which the endless points of light were moving, like luminous blood cells along transparent arteries. These arteries of light formed intersections which glowed and pulsated. My mind saw that there were countless intersections, some so large and bright, shining like the sun. The thought struck me like a thunderbolt that this pattern looked very much like a neural net, a map of the connections between neurons and a human brain, only the connections were formed by living, moving points of light, and the connections were endless, beyond all imagining. I do not know how long I remained there on my knees, my forehead pressed to the ground. It seemed like an eternity. The connectedness of it all overwhelmed me. I fell into a strange state of ecstasy. Slowly, I regained my senses. I lifted up my head. It was very early in the morning. The river mists were thick as the first shafts of light from the eastern sun began penetrating the darkness. There was Raphael of the gray eyes looking at me, smiling gently. The bodies of the two boatmen were still at his feet, but something had changed. I could see that their chests were moving. They were breathing as if in a deep sleep. I got up, and falling to my knees again at their side, I examined them. There was no discernible wound at all at their necks. They were definitely alive and breathing and sleeping. I looked for Abu. He was curled up like a puppy, fast asleep. What just happened? I asked Raphael. You have been asleep for a day and a night. You were touched by the presence of Elohim. You are privileged beyond all understanding. I saw Gabriel and another. Were they here? I asked. Yes, Michael and Gabriel, but they are gone now. It is time for you to go as well. Where am I to go? What am I to do? Tell me, and I will obey. It is not for me to command you or to reveal your fate. You must find that yourself. But I will visit you from time to time on your journey and help where I may. Raphael stood up and picked up his staff, preparing to go. He turned to me and said, Adam, you have done well. Elohim is pleased with you. You must go to Alexandria and deliver the letter that was entrusted to you by the tribune. You will find your destiny there. But I warn you, you must be careful not to misuse the gifts that have been entrusted to you. Beware of the power that you have been given. Raphael turned away, and walking through the grove of palm trees, disappeared into the mists. I turned back to Abu. He was beginning to stir. I nudged him gently to awake him. Abu, wake up. He stretched, opened his eyes, and looked at me. Then he sprang to his feet, eyes wide open. Kyrios, what happened? Abu, tell me what you remember. Kyrios, you were talking to someone, but there was no one there. I saw you fall on your knees, head to the ground. I thought you had gone mad, but I found I could not move to help you. I heard a rushing sound as a great wind. A great weariness came over me, and I fell asleep. That is all I remember until you woke me just now. The captain of the boat stirred, stretched, and sat up yawning. Abu cried out in fear and stumbled backwards, falling down on his back, elbows propping up his body, looking first at one and then the other boatman stirring. Abu jumped to his feet again, ran over to me, and fell on his knees, arms wrapping around my legs. Looking up at me, alarm on his face, his eyes wide, he exclaimed, Kyrios, how is this possible? How have you brought these men back from the land of the dead? Are you one of the gods? He began to tremble, and tears welled up in his eyes. This was not done by me or through my own power, but by an angel, Raphael, whom I was speaking to, even though you could not see him. What is an angel? Whimpered Abu. He is a messenger, I think, I said, putting my hands to his face. But Master, can you summons the gods through this messenger? Abu, it has not all been explained to me, but from what I know, I think there is only one God, but he has many messengers. Raphael is one of them, and he is my friend. I lifted Abu back to his feet. Fear not, all will be well. You shall see. Now let's tend to these two fellows and get on our way. Say nothing to them. We must keep these things between ourselves. Others will not understand. Promise me. Abu bowed his head. As you wish, Master. The captain and his mate were now sitting up, rubbing their eyes, yawning and stretching. By Serapis, said the captain, I haven't had such a delicious sleep in many ages. He then looked around. How did we get here? The last I remembered, we were on the boat, anchored for the evening. I have no memory of stopping here. My friends, I said, you had too much to drink last night if you can't recall how we got to this place. Rest now and eat, for we must be on our way soon. But let me look at you first, for I am a physician. By the gods, I am hungry, exclaimed the first mate. I could eat a water buffalo. I carefully examined the captain and the crewmate, looking at their necks, and again could detect no scar, no sign of any injury. I pondered these things in my heart. It began to dawn on me that the things I had been taught as a child, in which in my adulthood I had discarded as silly beliefs, were grounded in a deep, mysterious truth that was beyond my comprehension, training, and experience. I had now seen and sensed evil, the power of darkness, and now knew with certainty that there were powers of goodness. It was all real. I began to understand that reality was far more complex than I could imagine. I knew now that there were deep mysteries in abundance beyond my own understanding. I felt foolish that I had lived my life thinking that there was no power higher than myself and my intellect. I was humbled but grateful. I had heard of miracles before, but had discounted any prospect of them being true. Now I knew. From that moment on, I began looking at the world differently. I had been living a lie. The trip up the great river unfolded peacefully over the next 3 days, repeating many of the sights we had seen further down the river. Abu would sit with me for hours at a time at the bow of the ship, taking all of this in. Abu was in awe of me. He hung on my every word with devotion in his eyes. He stared at me with his face alight, entranced. He wanted to know more about me, where I came from, how I acquired these powers over life and death. He asked me again and again if I was a god. I became alarmed, and time again tried to explain to him that I had no powers, that I was just an ordinary person like himself, and that if these men had been brought to life, I had no power myself to do so. Abu, all power came from the angel, the messenger. You must not worship me as a god, for that would disrespect the angel and God, the Father who sent him here to help us. Do you understand? I do not understand, Kyrios, but I will obey. You must also swear to keep what you saw a deep secret, for others would not understand and would place us in great danger. Master, tell me about the messenger who talked to you out of thin air, of whom other people could not see. Is this the messenger of the gods, Hermes, or Mercury as the Romans know him, or Thoth as we call him? Tell me what you know about Thoth, I asked, as I am not from this country and do not know. Abu excitedly began to recite all he knew about Thoth. I was impressed again with his intelligence and his ability to articulate the story. Kyrios, we call Thoth Dehuti because he who is like the ibis. He has the body of a man and the head of an ibis. The ibis, Kyrios, is the most sacred bird. It is the bird of wisdom. The great Thoth is the lord of Ma'at, the divine words. He is the scribe of Ma'at in the company of the gods. He is the unchanging and honorable judge. He was born from the lips of Ra, the sun. He became the ibis and laid the egg from which came all of creation. It is Thoth who is the go-between of the gods. It is he who settles their quarrels with his wisdom. He is the scribe who records all events and gives counsel to the gods. He is the healer. He presides over justice among humankind. He wrote the 7 laws of Ma'at: truth, balance, order, harmony, righteousness, morality, and justice. He is the peacemaker, and if these laws are broken, the punisher. He is the creator of all law, magic, philosophy, religion, and sciences. He is the infallible judge. Abu, you surprise me. How well you know these things. Who taught you? My mother, Kyrios. She told me these things before she passed away to the land of the dead and left me to my uncle, who wasted his life as a drunkard. Tell me more, my boy. It is said, Kyrios, that Sekhmet, the daughter of Ra, quarreled with her father. She left him and disappeared to a far-off land, far beyond the desert. Someone had to be sent to bring her back, so she could bring great change to the people when she returned. But Sekhmet could not be forced, and so Ra chose Thoth, to go fetch her back. He took the form of a baboon, and through humility, cunning, and persistence, he asked Sekhmet to come back many times. Finally she came. Ra rewarded Thoth with the goddess Nuhumatani for his wife, and gave him a seat of honor in the skyboat which crosses heaven by night and day. Thoth drove away the great serpent Apep, the evil one, the enemy of Ra, the uncreator who seeks to destroy the sun. Thoth gave us the written words used by scribes to record our history and our lives. He understands all, watches all, and writes down all that happens, and tells Ra every morning. He knows the future as well as the past. He keeps account of all the days of humankind. Thoth sits at the side of the lords Osiris and Anubis, Kyrios. In the hall of truth, it is he who has kept accounts of the lives of the souls, the Ba and the Ka. Once the soul finishes its journey to the underworld, it comes to the hall of Ma'at. Their heart is weighed in the scales by Anubis against the feather of Ma'at. Thoth records the results of each weighing and presents this to Osiris, who admits them into the Sekhet Aru. But if their heart is heavier than the feather, it is eaten by the goddess Ammit, and that is the end of the soul. It seems to me, Abu, that this Thoth is a rather busy fellow, but I don't think Raphael is Thoth. He dresses like an ordinary human, has gray eyes, and definitely doesn't have the head of an ibis, and he serves one god, not many. Abu looked down thoughtfully and was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me intently, wide-eyed, and exclaimed, "Kyrios, are you Thoth?" "No, Abu, I am not. Whatever healing was done on these men, it was not I who did it. I don't know and can't explain how Raphael did this extraordinary thing. I wish I did know. But please keep what you saw our secret. These men will never understand. We must keep it to ourselves. You will understand why someday." The days resumed their rhythm. I watched the captain and his mate carefully. I told him that I was a physician on my way down the river to Alexandria, where I was intending to gain employment and study at the Serapeum. They nodded in understanding. I asked them whether they remembered anything. The captain replied, "Kyrios, I have nothing to tell you. I fell asleep. I slept deeply without dreams. Then I woke up refreshed. There's nothing more to know." But I thought again and again until my head hurt. How can this possibly be? These men had been stone cold dead. I had seen them with their throats slit, with their lifeblood oozing out from that terrible slash wound on their necks. When we had wrapped the corpses up, I had carefully examined them as a trained pathologist would do. There was no sign of life. They had lain dead, their corpses wrapped and stowed away in the hold for almost a whole day. What natural or physical process could there be to possibly explain this? But there was no explanation. I had not believed in miracles, but here I was utterly faced with one. Why them? Why was I brought here to see them die, and then witness one of the most extraordinary things a doctor could ever see, someone brought back to life? I now began to question my whole life, and all that I had come to believe. If dead men could be brought back to life, then what else may be possible? I yearned to speak to Raphael again, and to ask them these questions. I was burning to understand. Our days resumed their rhythm. We passed Memphis, the former capital of the Old Kingdom, and the necropolis's temples and pyramids near Saqqara. Further up the river, just before it branched into the many channels that became the Nile Delta, I could see, close by the river, incredibly white and shiny in the afternoon sun, the great pyramids at Giza. I remembered seeing photos and videos of them from my time, but here 2,000 years before, they were smooth-sided, still covered by their polished limestone casings, which over the years had then since been stripped away. The peaks were capped in gold. It was an incredible sight, justly one of the wonders of the ancient world. They were reflected, mirrored in the waters of the nearby Nile. The river forked into multiple channels as we were now in the Nile Delta. We took the westernmost course, which snakes and turns back on itself, but continued towards the sea and the great city of Alexandria. Closer and closer we came. The land was lush and fertile, the soils in the field black, the animals and the laborers more and more numerous. Villages and towns grew closer and closer together. Finally, we crossed Lake Mareotis and came to the great port city of Alexandria. We rowed down a canal through the city and emerged into the outer harbor. The first stage of my journey was now done. I looked back on all that had happened. I had come this far and looked forward to what would come next. Music for Chapter 5. Legends by Ed Records. Stand Up by Twins Music. Ophelia's Dream by Ben Sound. Somewhere Far Away by Andy Bird. Risen Up from the Ashes by Ben Sound. Unus ex discipulus meus. Rise by Twins Music. Magical Journey by Andy Bird.